After the ending of Saw 4 in 2007, it opened up a doorway for many possibilities for this franchise to continue. With the reveal that Hoffman was actually the Jigsaw apprentice they were looking for all along, and also revealing he would be the one to continue John's work post his death. In the October of 2007, however, pre-production for Saw 5 had already begun, with Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunson returning to outline the story. With Saw 5, David Hackle made his directorial debut after previously turning down the directing duties for Saw 4 due to his wife unfortunately being diagnosed with cancer, but with Saw 5 he fills in the directing chair, and it's not like he was new to the series either, as he had previously served as the production designer for Saw 2, 3, and Saw 4, and was also a second unit director for Saw 3 and 4 as well. With Saw 5, Hackle also spoke about the fast-paced writing process, saying, "We have about a week to write the outline, then the script by the end of the month. We're really just throwing down the ideas now and it's coming together quickly. I've been with Darren on all of the sequels. We've always arrived just before Christmas with a script that needed a lot of shakedown, but before shooting, the script is really tight. Right into the last day of filming, we're always changing things and adjusting things, just seeing what works as the story unfolds, and I think that's why people like them, because we never really let them rest. We don't go into pre-production with a white script and say, that's it, no changes. We push it so there's no holes." He aimed to bring a more emotional context to films so the audience would have an emotional investment to the characters and traps. Without that, Hackle felt the traps would just be like a gory horror film, which he did not want. When it came to casting and filming Saw 5, Tobin Bell, Scott Patterson, Costas Mandylor, and Betsy Russell reprised their respected roles for the fifth entry in the iconic series. Patterson had signed on through Saw 6, but stated, "That doesn't mean I'll actually be in it, nor does it mean I'll do it. It's their option." Tobin Bell, whose character was killed in Saw 3, shot all new flashback scenes of the film. Bell stated that Russell's character Jill, who plays his ex-wife, would not be featured as prominently as she was in Saw 4, but still plays an important part in the story. Julie Benz was cast as Britt, a real estate developer who's put in a jigsaw trap. Benz described her as a very unlikable character. On her experience filming Saw 5, she also stated, "Filming the movie freaked me out. I had nightmares. I'd never been in a psychological horror movie. It actually affected me on a deep level. I don't know if I can actually see this one." However, Benz praised Hackle's directing technique, such as using a full storyboard on set, which helped the actors know the correct camera angles at any given time. Principal photography for Saw 5 then took place from March 17th to April 28th in 2008 in Toronto, allowing it for an October 2008 release date. In its opening weekend, Saw 5 grossed $30 million in 3,000 theaters in the United States and Canada, ranking number 2 at the box office behind High School Musical 3 senior year. It grossed $56 million in the United States and Canada and an additional $57 million in other markets for a worldwide total of $113 million at the box office. The film received generally negative reviews from critics. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, it received a 13% out of 76 critics, having it receive the poorest critical reception out of the 5 movies thus far in the series. Saw 5 is an entry in the series that I've always found is a bit iffy personally. Over the many years, I went from absolutely despising this movie, it being my least favorite movie in the series to date. Back in 2017, I had this whole video where I basically ranted and babbled about how I absolutely fucking despised this movie. Granted, at the time, I was also a young teenager. I was like fucking, 15 years old reviewing these movies, trying to get somewhere on YouTube as a film critic and trying to get that notoriety, that reception. I was bombastic, over the top. Hell, my Emoji Movie review is something to say, and so is my Jaws the Revenge video. I wouldn't act that way now, but back then I thought that being an idiot on camera throwing a fucking desk chair was what would get me likes and attention. In reality, that is not the case, however. Then in 2021, when I re-reviewed this movie leading up to the release of Spiral, I liked it a little bit more than I did in 2017, maybe because I went from an optimistic standpoint and one that was open-minded to rewatching this movie in 2021 as a massive fan of the series. I never denied that I enjoyed watching this movie, but I will say it was one of my least favorites in the franchise as a whole. But, you know, I still gave it a fairly low grade. Now, however, watching Saw 5 all these years later again, because here's the thing. Saw 5, because of how I've personally viewed the entry in the series, I've always preferred just watching the trap plot. I've always just preferred watching the traps and, you know, the test of the Fatal 5. I've always really liked the traps in this movie. Aside from the cube, which we'll talk about a little later as to why I never used to like that trap, and to a certain degree still don't. But I've come around in it a little bit, just like this movie as a whole. When it comes to Saw 5 now, however, I really like this movie. I wouldn't put it in like my top 5 Saw movies so far out of the 9 we have. Who knows? It might be in my top 5. But I would personally say it's definitely above 3D, Jigsaw, and 4. Whereas initially, it was the one just above Jigsaw and below 4. Hell, I actually used to have 4 above 3, but that's drastically fucking changed. For this video, I actually watched this movie twice. I watched this movie twice because on my first rewatch, I sat there and I'm like, did I enjoy that more than I remember enjoying it? And then I rewatched it again just to make sure I really felt how I felt. And I'm recording this fresh off of watching this for the second time, which I don't normally do when I'm reviewing older movies or talking about older movies. I don't like the idea of having to watch a movie twice to make sure, but due to my previous thoughts and my previous opinion on Saw 5, I thought that it was fitting for me to do that. And I gotta say, I really like Saw 5 because in previous years, like I've always sat down and I've done a marathon of the Saw movies at least once every single year. I've always sat down and I've always thought, let's sit down for one night each year and just binge watch all the movies. Or at least throughout the year, I would sprinkle out the entries and I would have my ones that I watch on their own. Saw 1, 2, and 6 being the ones that I rewatch the most out of each year. Saw 1 in particular being one that I actually watch at least once a month, I reckon. And then Saw 2 and 6 being my favorite sequels. There are certain entries I'd watch sprinkled throughout the year, but when it came to certain entries in the series that I just watched maybe once, and that was during the binge each year, it would be Saw 5, Saw 3D, and Jigsaw. Saw 5 was a part of that category, and now I actually see this as one of the more rewatchable Saw movies. I will say this in comparison to like Saw 3 and Saw 4. Don't get me wrong, I think Saw 3 is a better Saw movie and a better movie as a whole, but it is a much better paced movie when it comes to Saw 5. Saw 5 is a much better paced movie than the 2 previous installments. Saw 4 had a massive problem in regards to the trap plot, in my opinion, not being all that interesting. Granted, the concept behind it is fine. I think it's fine. It's a little confusing, but it's fine. But the trap plot itself isn't entirely interesting and has a lot of problems. In regards to Saw 3, it's the fact that the movie's way too long with not enough substance to keep you interested for the entire roughly 2-hour runtime. Yeah, everything with Lynn Denlin and Jigsaw is really interesting, really fascinating, and the best scenes in the entire movie, but it's the trap plot and everything else in between that is a little bit of a mess that really slows everything down. When it comes to Saw 5, however, I do have an issue in regards to the structure of the movie, but in regards to pacing, this is one of the faster paced Saw movies. Like, this one flies by like no fucking tomorrow. And I think that is also due to the very hyperactive and hypertension directing given to us by a very energetic David Hackle, who has been a part of this franchise since Saw 2 as a production designer. David Hackle, in my opinion, does such a marvelous job with directing this movie. Granted, there's a little things here and there in regards to, oh, the camera could have been positioned a little bit different, or the hypertension sped up editing feels like it's being used a little bit too much as a stylistic choice to overshadow a lot of other things in this movie. But in all, I think Saw 5 is a damn good entry in the series that doesn't necessarily do anything new. It doesn't necessarily do anything unique. But it does a good enough job progressing the story forward as a direct sequel to Saw 4 in this new trilogy line of Saw entries, because you have the Saw 1 through 3 era, then Saw 4 through Saw 6, and then just Saw 7's on its own, and Jigsaw's currently on its own, Spiral's currently on its own, and then we got Saw X coming out, so now it'll be like Saw 1 through 3 with X in the middle of 2, I guess, I don't know. But Saw 5 is a good middle point in the sequel trilogy, let's call it that, the sequel trilogy of Saw, because Saw 5 does such a great job with the traps. It does a good job in regards to the cat and mouse. I like the cat and mouse game between Hoffman and Strahm for the most part. Granted, Strahm has a big problem with talking to himself constantly, but I like the fact that Scott Patterson is still an incredibly commanding and very energetic voice on screen. Whenever he is on screen, whether it's Detective Erickson that is on screen with him, or whether it's by himself, he steals the show. He owns the screen. He owns the room. And Scott Patterson has always been like that in all of his movies and TV shows, I feel. Which is something I mentioned in the previous review I did for Saw 4. I also feel that having the trap plot sprinkled so evenly throughout the main plot in regards to, hey, here's the cat and mouse game, here's Erickson on, Strahm's tail and then suspecting him, and then Hoffman trying to frame him for the new trap game and all the things that have been going on. I feel like them sprinkling in the Fatal 5 trap plot in the middle of all of this is a very good idea, because it gives us the good story that keeps us going with all the really soap operatic flashbacks that we've all come to know and love within this series, with all that sprinkled in with the trap plot in the middle, giving us our gore, giving us our traps, and what a lot of us in 2008 sort of went to the movies to see at the time. It gave us enough to keep us interested and invested throughout the entire roughly 90 to 93 minute runtime, depending on which version of the movie you watched. Me personally, I watched both editions of this movie. Granted, I can barely tell you what's different, but I will say I watched both the theatrical cut because I own a digital copy through YouTube Movies, but I also own the Blu-ray, which is the unrated Extreme Edition, they call it on the opening title screen. By the way, I've got to say, I kind of miss, DVD and Blu-ray title menus like what Saw 5 has. It's so cool, it's so unique, it's so much fun. This is also, by the way, the first entry in the entire series to earn that beautiful R rating in Australia. That R18 plus for high-level violence, blood, and gore. Every other entry in the series only received an MA15 plus at the time. Saw 4, MA15 plus. Saw 3, MA15 plus. Saw 2, MA15 plus. And Saw 1, MA15 plus. And by the way, these are all the unrated editions for the movies, by the way. So the Blu-rays I'm showing you, it isn't a matter of, it's, you're not watching the unrated editions. No, these are all the unrated cuts for the Saw movies. Like, they've got that beautiful unrated sticker on it. Like, they're all unrated editions. So whether you're talking theatrical or you're talking unrated, Saw 5 is the first entry in the series to be R18 plus, at least in Australia. I know that all these movies have an R17 in America, but the rating system and the censorship and the certification board in Australia is slightly altered and slightly different. In reality, the only difference is you need a parent to accompany you to MA15 plus, and you'll be able to watch the movie. When it comes to an R18, you are not allowed at all. If you are under the age of 18, you are not allowed to go to the movies to see an R movie. Never stopped me as someone under the age of 18, however. There's a little trick. In Australian theaters, they rarely have the ticket guy who checks your ticket when walking into a theater. They never have that, really. It's very rare you'll actually see it at the theaters I go to, at least. So I just sort of bought a ticket online and walked through. But in regards to that R18 plus rating in Australia, I've got to say, it is more than fucking deserved for Saw 5. Saw 5 is without a doubt the most violent, the most brutal, the most gory, and the most fucked up entry in the series thus far. Let's talk about the traps. Saw 5 starts off inherently strong with its violence and gore. This is without a doubt one of the most violent fucking entries in the entire series. Granted, you have the pound of flesh and also the acid needles from Saw 6. And then you also have the, the reverse bear trap, the horsepower trap, you have the public execution, you have the pain train, and all that jazz from Saw 3D. But at the same time, when it comes to the most violent entry in the series thus far, and some of the most fucked up traps consistently, Saw 5, in my opinion, takes the cake. From the incredible fucking pendulum trap at the beginning of the movie where you see Seth Baxter completely cut in half with gorgeous fucking gore that is just splattering fucking guts and stomach acid and fucking intestines and organs fucking all over the place in this little warehouse and everything. It is a really gnarly fucking trap that I'm surprised they got away with, considering that Spiral couldn't get away with the face peeling trap, which I'd argue from behind the scenes footage that we have seen in photos and videos that have been posted all over the fucking internet and Twitter and everything of Spiral, this trap with Seth Baxter with the pendulum is more fucking violent. Yet Spiral couldn't give us a skidding trap, like a face peeling trap? Where did that go? And why was that cut compared to Saw 5's pendulum? And I've also got to point out the incredible behind the scenes footage for this movie as well. The behind the scenes footage for this movie is absolutely spectacular regarding how they actually filmed this trap in particular, how they actually had a working pendulum that was swinging with the actor playing Seth Baxter on like a 45-degree angle on a 2-layered table, where it was a practical torso that was made out of a mold of his body that was sort of up to like his chest, that was genuinely being cut in half with guts and everything, and like all these fucking projectors and cannons that was shooting guts and blood everywhere, and all, it's fucking wonderful. If you've never seen the behind the scenes for Saw 5, I highly recommend you check it out. Like, the way that they film these traps is absolutely nuts. Seriously, if you've never seen the behind-the-scenes footage, I highly recommend you check it out. You can either check it out on the Blu-ray, or you can check it out, on YouTube. A lot of the stuff for all these movies is on YouTube for the behind-the-scenes. But then you've also got the test of the Fatal 5. I'm going to talk about them before Scott Patterson or Peter Strahm's The Cube, really quickly. But the collar is an iffy trap to me, because I think the entire concept behind it is one of the best traps in the entire series. Because when you're actually getting pulled in, and you're actually getting that fear of being decapitated while you're doing your test, you're on a race against the clock, essentially, to get the key. You got 60 seconds for 5 people to get a key. That's one person roughly every 12 seconds. Like, that's not enough fucking time for all of them, which is a part of the game in regards to the quote-unquote twist of the movie, where they all needed to work together. It's barely a twist, in my opinion. I'd actually say Saw 5 doesn't really have a twist. A lot of people are like, oh, Strahm's death, that's a twist. No, it's just another fate. And a lot of people are like, oh, what about the test of the Fatal 5, the twist that they all had to work together? I mean, if you look at how the traps were, designed, you can kind of figure that out. It's very obvious that the, the glass jars trap, that the tunnels were way bigger for more than one person. It's very obvious that with the cables in regards to the bathtub and the electrical shock, that it was meant to for 5 people, considering there are 5 locks, 5 electrical circuits that need to be connected. 5 people. I honestly think that Saw 5 has 2 iffy traps, and that's the glass jar and the trap in regards to the electrical circuit. But I think the whole thing behind why they're so iffy is because the dumb characters involved in the Fatal 5. Like, my big thing about the Fatal 5 is that I really enjoy watching them. The gore is fucking splendid. Seeing the journalist guy, whose name I can't fucking remember for the life of me, he's a very forgettable character, aside from him being an absolute prick, no matter how smart he might have been, is the fact that he isn't very memorable. So therefore, when he dies, I don't remember his name, but that image of his charred, burnt, and absolutely just decimated body after being blown up is so cool and so wonderful in a way for me to see. It's so cool, in a way. But when you got also Luba, I think her name was, who then died from getting stabbed in the neck by Britt, to be put into the bathtub. She died very quickly, which is a little bit iffy compared to how other people die in these movies, who are suffering much worse fates and don't die nearly as quickly. She just gets blatantly stabbed in the neck, although that is a major artery that she got stabbed in, so that has probably something to do with it. But seriously, the traps in this movie are fine, for the most part, aside from, they're great, actually, I'll say, aside from those 2. But a lot of that is due to unlikable characters who are doing nothing but yelling at each other. In Saw 2, them yelling at each other being unlikable really works, because they're all prisoners. They're all people that are in a high-pressure situation involving nerve gas, where they've got to get the needles. They're all fighting for this antidote. Whereas in Saw 5, it's more or less a race against the clock for the trap themselves after activated, but otherwise they've got like 15 minutes to get out of each fucking room, in reality, before the nail bombs, the C4 goes off. Which I do like, because initially when I was rewatching this movie, I'm like, hang on, they got 15 minutes to get through all of these traps? Like, that doesn't make sense considering how the movie ends and how it starts, and there's no way they did all of this in 15 minutes, but then by the end of the collars, I figured it out pretty fast that they've got 15 minutes to, get through each room. And I really like that, because it gives them enough time with what their test is to find out what they have in common. That with the blessings they've been given since birth, they will be told to do one thing, but Jigsaw implores them to do the opposite. It gives them enough time to really think, to strategize, to think all this out, to get to know each other, to feel and know what they have in common before they continue. And I think that's a really interesting, really fun and cool idea for these people. It is truly testing them, and it feels like they do all have a chance of survival as long as they think strategically, in a way, and as long as they all think with their heads as opposed to what their instincts tell them. So I actually think the test and the purpose of the Fatal 5 is phenomenal. I just don't like the characters, but the fucking 10 pints of blood trap might be one of the goriest traps in the entire series ever. This trap is so gruesome, so gnarly, especially in the unrated extended edition of this trap. You see so many shots that weren't in the theatrical. You see so much blood, so much violence. It's all over the place. Blood is fucking everywhere. The close-up shots of their arms getting just fucking hacked up right up the middle is such a gnarly and gruesome and fun sight to see, I'll say. I think it's so weird for me to say. And on my second viewing, my mother was out in the living room watching it with me, and even I was watching her, and the disgust on her face while she was just like, ugh, really? Like, I think my mom has a lot of questions as to why I like these movies now, and I don't blame her for that if I'm being completely honest. But I think the Pints of Blood trap is phenomenal. And them finally figuring it out, Britt and Malik, on what they needed to do to really survive. And then them coming up with the idea, one of us sacrifices 10 pints and dies, or 5 pints each. Maybe live. They took that gamble at maybe living rather than one assured life and one assured death. And I think it paid off because they both survived in the end. And them working together, finally doing what Jigsaw implored them to do. The opposite is fantastic. It's definitely one of the gnarliest and most gruesome traps to date, and also in the entire series, which is quickly dethroned, by the way, by the next trap, which is the Glass Coffin. The Glass Coffin with the walls closing in. Oh my god, this is a trap that a lot of us, I think, have been wanting to see a result for ever since Star Wars in 1977 with the trash compactor on the detention level. And also, having recently watched 13 Ghosts for the first time, I found out that we did see it in that movie, but granted, not as in such explicit detail. I loved watching the behind the scenes for this trap because, one, this was apparently a very complicated trap to pull up because it needed to look real, it needed to look gritty, but it also needed to be safe. It was made out of wood, it was completely functional with a pulley system on either side, and getting the look of Hoffman where it was pitch black darkness, all focused on him while getting the overhead shots of Strahm trying to escape, wasn't apparently easy to pull off. The prosthetic arm and mold that they made of Strahm from Scott Patterson's actual arm, where when his arm breaks and it just goes pop and you see the bone pop out, is so cool. I love the prosthetic and practical work that they did on the first 7 Saw movies in particular, which they sort of went away with by Jigsaw. I constantly shit on Jigsaw in these movies. In these videos, sorry. But Ooh, Jigsaw pisses me off. That is such a frustrating movie. But the way that they actually pulled off this trap is so fascinating. And again, watching the behind the scenes of these movies is so interesting and gives you an idea of how they pulled off a lot of these sequences and what went into making these movies and these trap sequences. And it makes me realize as well how much I'd love to work on one of these movies one day, and how much I'd love to be a victim in a trap for one of these movies, or how much I'd love to be involved with the making of one of these traps, at least like, hello, Lionsgate, I'm right here, please help. It would be a dream come true if that happened, but I don't see it happening. But in reality, like, I have to talk about the cube though, because the cube is a trap I've always kind of shat on, because the inescapability of it, the execution. I understand that that is the purpose of the trap, to execute Strahm and what Hoffman was doing. But considering that we see a flashback of Hoffman receiving an envelope with what was a fair game that he then had to design and build and everything, and it was essentially Hoffman's game with the Fatal 5, him then being granted anonymity with him then killing Strahm, or attempting to at least, where he was the sole hero, wouldn't have seemed a bit suspicious to anyone else in the department, especially when he was the one who created the Seth Baxter trap with the pendulum. It wasn't a bit sus that he was at the crime scene of Seth Baxter's death, even though it was his sister that was killed at the hands of Seth Baxter. This didn't raise any red flags to anyone that he so happened to be in a Jigsaw trap and then Hoffman was called the scene and everything, and had no remorse. Granted, this is a plot point sort of brought up in Saw 6, but at the same time, even in Saw 5 with the flashbacks and everything, you don't think that this wouldn't have raised a few red flags? And not only that, isn't it a conflict of interest to have him on the scene of that crime of Seth Baxter's death? Why the fuck was he there? But the overall cube trapping concept I think is really cool, and it's the most badass way anyone's ever escaped a fucking trap. Like, holy shit, Chad move from fucking Strahm giving himself a tracheotomy to actually breathe and survive and wait for help. But I've seen a lot of people be like, drink the water. Your electrolytes, you'd vomit. You wouldn't be able to drink that much water in such a short amount of time. Not to mention as well, when it comes to reaching the tubes. Okay, you got a box that is like your shoulder span right there. Yeah, okay, you're not reaching those fucking tubes like this. There's no way you're going to be able to reach them to escape. You won't be able to do that. I think the trapped in concept was really cool, and the fact that Scott Patterson was actually submerged in that water for the making of this trap, and they had a little safety lever where they had to pull it at the front and then open it up to drain the water, and they had to actually give him a call sign for him to be like, hello, I need air. While filming this meant they were always on the clock. This is a hard trap that they had to film, so I give the filmmakers, Scott Patterson, and everyone involved with making this trap a lot of fucking credit. Way more than I'd give a lot of the other traps, as a matter of fact. This is a dangerous trap to film. Scott Patterson actually could have died. Same thing with Seth Baxter. Like, they had to make a phone, but an actual metal pendulum, where if anything went wrong, he could have died if that pendulum lowered just a little bit too much. And that's where you got to give a lot of credit to the filmmakers in this movie, and the entire Saw series, as a matter of fact, because the behind the scenes shit for these movies is absolutely fucking nuts. I also feel like the flashbacks in these movies as well are starting to get a little too soap operatic. Like, it was bad enough in Saw 4, where I like the flashbacks, by the way. I need to reiterate that, like I said in my Saw 4 video, but at the same time, in Saw 4, we had the coffin revealed, which is apparently a scrapped concept for Saw 4 and was later used in Saw 5. But at the same time, okay, then why fucking show it in Saw 4 if we're not going to see the trap and the result until Saw 5? Saw 6, holy crap. In Saw 5, we have the same thing in regards to the box that John leaves Jill in his will. We don't see the contents of the box until the ending of Saw 6, but we also got the box at the beginning of Saw 5? This is where the movies sort of go into full soap opera territory, and I kind of fucking love it. The flashbacks in regards to Hoffman meeting Jigsaw and them, kidnapping Paul before he was put on the razor wire, which, by the way, the scenes of Strahm investigating the crime scenes is really cool, but he needs to stop talking to himself, in my opinion. But at the same time, how in the fuck are these crime scenes not cleaned up? Like, you still got the blood on the floor in the room that Jigsaw died. You still got the razor wire and everything in the area that Paul died in the razor wire trap from Saw 1. How, after all of this time, had these crime scenes not been cleaned up? It makes no fucking sense to me. But at the same time, a little bit of leeway is provided. But the flashbacks in this are really cool. Some of them are really funny, such as the lady coming out of the elevator and saying, "Do you mind?" to fucking Hoffman. But the introduction of Hoffman and Jigsaw meeting each other. Some people say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. I'm the man you call Jigsaw. I think this scene where the shotgun underneath Hoffman's chin is really fascinating. Just the dialogue and the back and forth between them is so fucking good. I love it. And a lot of the flashbacks are like that. Some of them are soap operatic-y, and some of them really don't feel like they need to be there, but they're interesting enough to keep the viewer entertained and interested. I think it's one of the more fast-paced and interesting Saw movies as a whole. I actually have come around on Saw 4. Saw 5, not Saw 4. It took me a moment to realize. I've come around quite substantially in Saw 5, and I actually really like this movie now. I don't think it's one of the best movies in the series by any means. That's not in my top 5. I don't think it's one of the greatest movies ever made, but do I think the low critic reception was deserved? Fuck no. Do I think that my recent reception of the movies and how I treated Saw 5 in the past is necessary? Fuck no. I think that this is actually a really solid entry in the series and is a good middle point in this trilogy of Saw entries from Saw 4 through to Saw 6. Saw 5 is a really fun and enjoyable time. I rewatched it twice to make sure I wasn't just kidding myself and I wasn't fucking high on something. My opinion on Saw 5 has drastically changed since the last time I reviewed this movie, and honestly, I think it's a really fun movie to actually sit down with friends and watch. And, you know, the whole cat and mouse game is exhilarating between Strahm and Hoffman and Erickson, which Erickson's sort of just a fucking Hail Mary, in my opinion. Like, doesn't need to be in this movie necessarily. He's basically a character in there to suspect Strahm, to put it on him to set up Saw 6. Which makes sense, if you think about it, but at the same time, he sort of has little to no relevancy or involvement in Saw 6, in my opinion. But he's still a fun enough character. Bluetooth Erickson, as Dead Meat nicknamed him, I'll say. Well, we'll get into a little bit more about him in Saw 6 with my review with Ken Sledge and his beautiful wife, Ashley, which I can't wait to talk about. But guys, Saw 5 has been released, what, how many years ago now? 15 years ago? And I actually think it's improved over time. Me learning to appreciate it a hell of a lot more than I did when I initially reviewed it and when I initially watched it. And even 2 years ago when I re-reviewed it and then now re-reviewing it now, another 2 years later, I have grown such an appreciation for this movie. I really enjoy it. Yeah, Saw 5 is a really damn good and really fun time. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video once again for Saw 5 15 years later. In preparation for Saw 10, I can't wait to provide the rest of the review, guys. We're officially more than halfway through. All we've got left is Saw 6, Saw 3D, Jigsaw, and Spiral. We're getting into the nitty-gritty of things now, guys, and Saw 6 is one of my favorite entries in the entire series. It actually might be my second favorite, just below the first one, in my opinion. I don't know yet, gotta rewatch it. got to record the review with Ashley and Ken. I can't wait to provide that video to you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Look out for more movie reactions, movie reviews, Saw content coming very, very soon. Make sure to click the subscribe button and the bell to get notified when new videos are up every single week, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.